Get out of my house. The words didn't echo. They landed, sharp, final, like something heavy dropped on a hardwood floor. No one gasped, no one moved. It was as if the entire room had been waiting for that exact sentence to be spoken out loud. I was still holding the paper. DNA test results. It read across the top in cold, clinical lettering. Beneath it, numbers, markers, probabilities. And then the one line that had turned my entire world inside out. A probability of paternity, 0 T.P. This in mine, my husband had said just seconds before, his voice flat, almost rehearsed. I remember looking up at him, searching his face for anything, anger, confusion, even doubt. But all I found was distance, a quiet withdrawal that somehow hurt more than any shouting ever could. And then his mother stepped forward. She didn't hesitate. She didn't lower her voice. She pointed directly at me, her finger steady, her gaze colder than I had ever seen it. Get out of my house. Yeah, that was the moment everything broke. Just 3 hours earlier, I had been standing in my own kitchen, rinsing strawberries. My son Ethan was sitting in his high chair, swinging his little legs, humming to himself in that off-key way toddlers do when they're completely content. He had yogurt smeared across his cheek, and when I leaned over to wipe it away, he giggled like I had just told the funniest joke in the world. That sound, that tiny, perfect sound. My phone rang. It was my husband. "Hey," I said, tucking it between my shoulder and ear. "You're calling early?" "Yeah." His voice was tight. Not cold, not warm. Just tight. "Can you come tonight? My mom's hosting a family dinner. She wants everyone there by 6. I glanced at the clock. Barely 3 in the afternoon. "Tonight? That's kind of sudden." "She just put it together. It's important." There was a pause, small, but noticeable. "Is everything all right?" I asked. "Yeah." He answered a beat too fast. "Just come." And then he hung up. I stood there for a moment, the silence in the kitchen suddenly louder than it should have been. Ethan reached for another strawberry, completely unaware that something had shifted. I told myself not to overthink it. My mother-in-law, Diane, was known for last-minute gatherings, family dinners, holiday celebrations, birthday surprises. She liked control. She liked being the center of it all. This wasn't unusual, but something about his voice stayed with me. The one with the tiny buttons that always made him look more grown-up than he was. I slipped into a simple white floral dress, kept my makeup light. Everything felt normal. I told myself everything was normal. The drive over was quiet. The sun was dipping low, casting that soft golden light over the neighborhood. And when Diane's house came into view, large, well-kept, always immaculate, I felt the first real knot form in my stomach. Every car was already there. My husband's, his sister's, his uncle's truck, even his cousin Mark's beat-up sedan, which he only drove out for things that actually mattered. I murmured quietly, unbuckling Ethan. He clapped his hands, excited by the change of scenery, completely unaware. I carried him up the walkway. Before I could even knock, the door opened. Diane stood there, no smile, no hug, no "you made it." Just one word. "Come in." The air inside different, heavier. I stepped into the living room and stopped. Everyone was already seated. Not at the dining table, but in the living room. Chairs arranged in a loose semicircle. Conversation stopped the second I walked in. Heads turned, one by one, like I had just stepped onto a stage I didn't know existed. No one was smiling. Ethan shifted in my arms, his small hand tightening around the fabric of my dress. "Hi," I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. No one answered. My husband stood near the window. He didn't come to greet me. Didn't reach for Ethan. Didn't move at all. He just walked forward slowly, holding something in his hand. An envelope. "Sit down," Diane said from behind me. I didn't. "What is this?" I asked, eyes fixed on my husband. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could see the tension in his jaw. He handed me the envelope without a word. My fingers felt clumsy as I opened it. The paper inside was crisp, official-looking. I read the header, AG DNA test results, ... A strange hollow feeling spread through my chest, and then I saw the line, the one that changed everything. When I looked up, my husband finally spoke. "The child isn't mine." And just like that, the room became a courtroom, and I was already guilty. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything. The room was still full of people, full of eyes, but it felt like someone had sealed me inside glass. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, loud and uneven, drowning out whatever came next. I looked down at Ethan. He had tucked his face into my shoulder, fingers clutching my dress. He didn't understand words like idne or apaternity. He understood tension. Children always do. "That's not true," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. "It can't be." No one responded. And somehow that silence was worse than any shouting. Diane stepped forward, as if she had been waiting for her cue. "It's right there in black and white," she said, her tone controlled but edged with something sharp. "Scientific. Verified." "Verified by who?" I asked. "Where did this even come from?" "I ordered it," my husband said, "a few weeks ago." Those words hit harder than anything Diane had said. "A few weeks ago," I repeated. "You did this behind my back." I needed to be sure. "Sure of what?" My voice cracked. "That I cheated on you?" A murmur moved through the room. His sister Karen shifted in her chair, arms crossed tightly. "Well," she said under her breath, but loud enough, "these things don't just happen." I turned to her. "Excuse me?" She shrugged. "Tests don't lie." "That's not always true," I shot back. "There can be mistakes, mix-ups." "Oh, come on," his uncle sighed heavily, leaning forward. "You expect us to believe this is some kind of lab error?" "Yes," I said, louder now, "because I know the truth." "And what is that?" Diane asked, her voice cutting cleanly through the room. I met her gaze. "I have never been unfaithful to your son. Plain, direct, as steady as I could make it. But instead of relief, instead of even a moment of pause, I watched something ripple across their faces. Skepticism, disappointment. As if my answer wasn't enough. As if the verdict had already been written before I even walked through the door. Diane let out a slow breath and shook her head. "I raised my son to be many things," she said, "but a fool isn't one of them." "So that's it?" I asked. "You've all decided based on one piece of paper?" "It's not just paper," Karen snapped. "It's evidence." "Evidence of what? A result none of you even understand?" My husband finally looked at me. Really looked. And for just a second I thought I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Doubt, conflict, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "Then explain it," he said. His voice wasn't angry. That would have been easier. It was tired. "Explain how a test says I'm not the father." I opened my mouth, then closed it. "Because how do you explain something you don't understand yourself?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice shaking. "But I know it's wrong." "That's not good enough," Diane said sharply. Ethan let out a small, confused whimper against my shoulder. That sound broke something open in me. "He's your grandson," I said softly, stepping forward. "Look at him." No one moved. "Look at him," I repeated. My husband hesitated. Diane didn't even glance. "He looks like every other baby at that age," she said dismissively. "That proves nothing." The room tilted slightly. I tightened my hold on Ethan, grounding myself in the weight of him, the warmth of him. "This is insane," I whispered. "All of you. This is insane." "What's insane," Diane said, "is thinking you can walk into this family and deceive us." "I didn't deceive anyone." "And yet here we are," Karen muttered. The whispers started then, low, hushed, but constant. She seemed so nice. I always thought something was off. Poor him, raising another man's child. Each word chipped away at something inside me. I looked back at my husband. He stood there, silent. Not defending me, not stopping them, just letting it happen. That hurt more than any of it. "You believe them?" I asked, barely above a whisper. You actually believe I would do this to you? He didn't answer right away, and in that pause I got my answer. I don't know what to believe, he finally said. Something inside me went very, very still. Not anger, not panic, just clarity, because in that moment I realized something I hadn't wanted to face. It didn't matter what I said. I had already been judged. Diane stepped forward again, her patience gone. This has gone on long enough. You've embarrassed this family enough for one night. I straightened slowly. I didn't embarrass anyone, I said quietly. You did that yourselves. Her eyes narrowed. Leave, she said. And this time there was no mistaking it. Get out of my house. Ati. I looked around the room one last time, at the faces I had spent years trying to belong to, at the man I had trusted more than anyone, and then I nodded. Okay, I said softly. I turned toward the door. My hand had just reached for the handle when it opened. A man I had never seen before stepped inside. Excuse me, he said calmly, glancing around the room. His eyes landed on the paper still clutched in my hand, then moved to my husband. I believe we need to talk about that DNA test. Everything stopped. No one spoke. The man stood just inside the doorway, composed, unhurried, like someone who had walked into the wrong room and realized too late it was exactly the right one. Diane recovered first. And who exactly are you? She demanded, stepping forward. This is a private family matter. The man didn't flinch. My name is Daniel Reeves, he said, producing an ID card from his jacket. I'm a case coordinator with North Valley Diagnostics. My husband's expression shifted. That's the lab, he said quietly. Daniel nodded. Yes, sir, the same lab that processed the test you're holding. He paused, looking around the room. And there's been a problem with it. We've already received the results, Diane said sharply. There's nothing left to discuss. I'm afraid that's not entirely accurate. Something in his tone, measured, careful, made my pulse quicken. What do you mean? I asked, stepping forward before I could stop myself. He turned to me, his expression softening just slightly. Ma'am, there's been a complication in the sample processing of that test. The word e-complication-y hung in the air like a fragile thread. What kind of complication? My husband asked. A chain of custody discrepancy, Daniel said. Specifically, a labeling error that occurred during intake. Silence. Not the heavy, judgmental silence from before. This one was different. Uncertain. Diane scoffed. That sounds like a very convenient excuse. It's not an excuse, Daniel replied calmly. It's a documented procedural error. I felt my grip tighten on Ethan as something fragile, something I hadn't dared to feel, began to rise inside me. Hope. So what does that mean? I asked, my voice barely steady. It means, Daniel said, looking directly at my husband, that the sample attributed to you may not have been yours. The room shifted. Karen straightened. Those labs have protocols. They do, Daniel agreed, and when those protocols are breached, we're required to investigate and notify all involved parties immediately. He reached into his folder and produced another set of papers. I came here as soon as I could. Diane shook her head, pressing her lips together. This doesn't change anything. The result we have is clear. It's also unreliable, Daniel said, not raising his voice, not backing down. That landed. You could feel it. The certainty that had filled the room just minutes ago began to crack. Even if there was a mix-up, Karen said quickly, that doesn't automatically mean. It means the result cannot be considered valid, Daniel interrupted. Legally or medically? My husband ran a hand through his hair. So what happens now? Daniel held up the second document. We conducted an expedited retest, he said, using verified samples and corrected procedures. My breath caught. And? I whispered. He looked at me, then at my husband, and then he spoke. The probability of paternity is 99.99%. The words didn't explode. They settled, slowly, deeply, like something heavy finally finding its place after being held up far too long. No one moved. No one spoke. The shift was almost physical. You could feel it, in the way shoulders dropped, in the way eyes moved to the floor, in the way the air in that room changed completely. I closed my eyes for just a second, not in relief, not yet, because relief would mean this hadn't happened, and it had. When I opened them again, I looked straight at my husband. He wasn't looking at the paper. He was looking at me, really looking, for the first time since I had walked through that door. He started, but the word didn't go anywhere. Diane stepped forward, her voice sharper now but far less steady. There has to be another explanation. The second test followed verified protocol from start to finish, Daniel said. The chain of custody is intact. The samples were cross-checked. The results are conclusive. He set the documents down on the coffee table with quiet finality. The first result should never have been released in the condition it was. The lab takes full responsibility. Diane opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in all the years I had known her, she had nothing to say. Daniel gave a small nod, more toward me than anyone else, then turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him, and suddenly it was just us again. Same room. Same people. Or relief. It just sat there, heavy, undeniable, like a mirror no one wanted to look into. Karen's arms were no longer crossed. They hung at her sides. My husband's uncle stared at the floor. Even Diane, so composed and commanding just minutes before, looked like something had gone out of her. My husband picked up the corrected report. Scanning it slowly. 99.99, he murmured. I didn't move toward him, because the distance between us wasn't physical anymore. It was something deeper than that. You should say something, Karen muttered quietly, glancing at him. He looked up. At me. I'm sorry, he said. 2 words. Simple. But they didn't land the way he probably hoped they would. Are you? I asked. He flinched, not dramatically, just enough. Because you didn't just question me, I continued. You investigated me, behind my back, and then you brought me here. I gestured slowly around the room. So your entire family could watch me be torn apart. No one tore you apart, Diane said reflexively. I turned to her. You pointed at me like I was something dirty you needed to remove from your home. My voice was quiet but steady. That wasn't concern, that was judgment. She didn't respond. And you, I said, turning back to my husband. You stood there, and you watched it happen, and you didn't say a word. He exhaled slowly. I thought I needed answers. And you decided I wasn't worth asking, I said. That was the core of it, not the test, not the accusation. The choice. He had nothing to say to that. Because there was no good answer. From across the room, Diane straightened slightly, reaching for whatever composure she had left. If there was concern, she said carefully, it was because the situation raised. Your son doubted me, I said, cutting her off gently. And instead of questioning that doubt, you fed it. I paused. I spent years trying to be part of this family, and the moment it got hard, not even truly hard, just uncertain, every single one of you decided I was guilty. The room was completely silent. He is my son, I said, pressing my lips to Ethan's hair. He has always been my son, and nothing that happened in this room tonight should have ever happened. No one argued, no one whispered, because there was nothing left to hide behind. My husband stepped closer. Stay, he said quietly. We can talk, we can figure this out. I looked at him, really looked, at the man I had built a life with, at the man who had stood in silence while I was taken apart piece by piece. We will talk, I said, but not here. What do you mean? This isn't something we fix in front of an audience, I said. This isn't a misunderstanding we laugh off over dinner. This is about trust. And right now, I don't feel that. He swallowed. So what are you saying? I shifted Ethan gently and met his eyes one last time. I'm going home, I said, with my son. And then you decide whether you want to rebuild something real or just pretend this didn't break it. He didn't speak. He didn't argue. Because for the first time that night, he understood exactly where he stood. Not the victim. Not the judge. The one who had something to prove. I turned toward the door. This time, no one told me to leave. No one asked me to stay. And somehow, that silence felt more honest than anything that had come before it. As I stepped outside, the evening air was cooler, clearer. Behind me, the house stood exactly as it always had. But I knew something had changed. Not just in them, in me. Because walking away this time wasn't defeat. It was a choice. I didn't sleep much that night, Ethan did, curled up beside me, one small hand resting against my arm like an anchor. Every time I shifted, he adjusted without waking, trusting that I was still there. That word stayed with me, a trust, Ottawa. Not the kind people say out loud, the quiet kind, the kind that lives in the small spaces between people, the kind you don't even notice until someone breaks it. By morning, the house felt different. Not broken, not empty, just honest. I made coffee, fed Ethan, let the rhythm of small, ordinary things steady me. Around 9, there was a knock at the door. I didn't rush to answer it. I already knew who it was. When I opened it, my husband stood there alone. No mother, no sister, no audience, just him. He looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from something heavier. The kind of exhaustion that comes from realizing you were wrong in a way that can't be undone. "Can I come in?" he asked. I held the door open. He walked in slowly, like he wasn't sure he deserved to be there. His eyes moved around the room. The couch, the toys on the floor, the coffee mug on the counter. The life we had built together. And then Ethan looked up. His face broke into a wide, pure smile. "Dada." That one word hit both of us. My husband froze for just a fraction of a second. Then he crouched down, instinct overtaking everything else. Ethan toddled straight into his arms, no hesitation, wrapping his little arms around his father's neck. No doubt, no distance. Just love. I watched them quietly, and I thought, hey, this is what you almost lost. Not just me, all of it, yeah. After a long moment, my husband stood again, still holding Ethan like he wasn't ready to let go. "I don't deserve how easy that was," he said softly. "No," I replied. "You don't." He nodded slowly. "I know sorry isn't enough. But I am. Not just for the test. For everything that came after it. For standing there and saying nothing while they—" He stopped, swallowed. "I let my fear turn into suspicion. And I let their voices get louder than yours. That was wrong. And I knew it, even then. I just didn't stop it." The room was quiet for a moment. "What do you want?" I asked finally. "Not what you think you should say. What do you actually want?" He looked at me steadily. "I want to be the man you thought you married. I want to earn back what I threw away in that room." He paused. "And I know I can't ask you to just go back to the way things were. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for the chance to start over. Slowly. Honestly." I studied him for a long moment. Apologies are easy when the truth is already proven. What matters is what comes after. "I'm not going to pretend last night didn't happen," I said finally. "I wouldn't ask you to. And I'm not going to trust you the same way, not right away." He nodded. "I understand. But," I said, "I will give you the chance to earn it back." Something shifted in his expression. Not relief exactly. Something quieter than that. "Thank you," he said. "This isn't forgiveness," I added gently. "It's a beginning." "That's enough," he replied. "That's more than I deserve right now." And for the first time since any of this began, I believed him. Later that week, we sat down with Diane. It wasn't dramatic. No raised voices, no long speeches. Just a conversation. uncomfortable, honest, and necessary. She didn't cry. She didn't crumble. But she looked at me across the table and said, I was wrong to judge before I understood. For Diane, that was a great deal. It didn't erase what had happened, but it acknowledged it. And sometimes that is exactly where healing has to start. The weeks that followed were not easy. Trust doesn't come back all at once. It comes back in small ways, in conversations that don't get avoided, in questions that get asked instead of assumed, in the quiet daily decision to choose each other again. And one evening, sitting at the same table that had once felt like a courtroom, I looked around, at my husband, at Ethan laughing at nothing in particular, at the ordinary, imperfect life we were carefully rebuilding, and I realized something. Family isn't about who stands with you when things are easy. It's about who is brave enough to admit when they were wrong. And love, real love, isn't blind. It sees the cracks. It sees the failures. And it chooses to stay anyway, not out of weakness, out of something much stronger than that. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been misjudged by the people who were supposed to know you best, I want you to hold on to this. Truth has a way of finding its way back. But trust is something we build carefully, patiently, and never carelessly. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want more stories like this one, stories about the quiet strength it takes to hold your ground when everything around you is falling apart, stay with us. We'll be right here.